Good evening, everyone.
Sean?
I'm Sean Campbell. I'm the chair of the Training Advisory Council.
Theo?
Theo Latta, PCCEP staff member. Thanks for being here.
Aisha?
Hi, Dr. Taylor, Aisha, call me Aisha, and Adam here. We have, you see Adam in the background? We are the consultants working with you on the data analysis, so we're really excited to talk with you tonight.
Okay, and should we call you Dr. Taylor or Isha? I just want to...
Aisha, Aisha's good.
Aisha,
Yeah.
okay.
Thank you. Thanks for asking.
It'd be very West Coast.
Or please.
Barb?
Hi, my name is Barb Branish, and I'm an interested community member and PCCEP follower.
Awesome. Taji? Just introducing yourself.
Yeah, Taji Chestnut, he, him, co-chair of PCCEP. Thank you all for coming today.
Claudia?
Hi, everyone. I'm Claudia. I'm the PCCEP project director.
Sam?
Good evening. Sam Diaz, Mayor's Office, he, him, his.
Asena?
Hi, everyone. My name is Asana Chavez Lawrence. Pronouns are she, her. I work in the mayor's office.
And Nathan?
Hi, I'm an interested community member and also a PCCEP follower. Pronouns he, him.
Okay, so we're a small group tonight, and that might make quick work of what we have to do. The agenda for tonight is to review the feedback we got on the survey and talk about what, if any, changes to the recommendations, amendments to the recommendations we want to make. And we want to also hear from our data analysts, Isha and Adam, who will be running us through their preliminary analysis of this data. They haven't had a lot of time, obviously, to do it. And then in the final part of the meeting, what we need to be thinking about is in what form we want to bring these recommendations to the City Council in early June. And we have the opportunity to have invited testimony. So who should we strategically invite to provide that testimony? And then, you know, we'll be talking about sort of, Taj will be talking about the timeline for moving forward. So we're going to start with going through the survey results, and I realize we have not yet publicized them to the broader community. We wanted to first meet with this group to talk through them, but we do intend to publish all these results. And I guess the best place to do that would be to put it on the PCCEP website. We could publish the results because that's what we said we were going to do. And I think it's a good transparent practice to do so. So with that, why don't I pass it over to Taji first, who's going to run through the survey results. And I realize there might be a little overlap with what you all are going to talk about later, but you could sort of focus in on your analysis. So Taji.
Yeah, thank you. And we also I want to preface that we'll only be looking at, I realize the only survey results, well, not even results we'll be looking at, we're only looking at the demographic information as of now. And so I want to pull that up to show y'all. So let's go to here. Here we got a total number of 336 responses, including the 10 from Map app and the Google form in total. I can put this in presentation form, that'd be easier to look at. Sorry, my computer is really slow. Okay, cool. Yeah. So here's the regions. You can see it's pretty split between across Portland. And then here is race. One thing we did know is that we had pretty low responses from the African American and the, well, really most POCs, there was a pretty low responses in contrast to the 260 responses from white people. I'll say on that real quickly, we are in a position where we could make the ask to extend the deadline of the survey if we wanted to capture more input. However, based on just the general responses we're already getting, we thought it wouldn't be necessary. If there was a big difference in responses of POCs versus non-POC, that might be a different thing, but we haven't noticed those trends as of now. And yeah, so that's why we haven't decided to push the timeline back. Next part, did the question go? Okay, cool, yeah. So here's the income breakdown. Also pretty split. However, there is a decent 100 or so over the 100,000 mark, which counts for about 1/3. So that's something to note. And then in regards to the folks who have experienced or are currently experiencing houselessness, we did get a good snapshot of some folks who could speak to that lived experience. And then next here we have the if you live with a disability, and we did have a couple of few folks who said that. Obviously disability is a general term, so it would include folks who have mental or behavioral health issues. And then last one, I believe, is your sexual orientation. Not surprising here, I guess, as well, proportional, but also there was, a decent amount who were part of the LGBTQ community though as well. So that's good. And I think that's all for demographic. And then obviously the responses were, then we can go, we can look at the percentages of people responding and how they like that, right? Elliot, you want me to show that stuff? You're muted, sorry.
Let's first stop at the demographics and see if anyone has any questions about that or comments before we move on to the actual recommendation.
I can go back to them. I was just going to change pages, but tell me if anyone wants to see a page. I'm just going to go to the. Okay, if no one has questions,
yeah,
I will.
No, I do have a question. I just had to get to the mic. My question is there a concern about the lack of responses from the BIPOC community? Is that not concerning to anyone?
Yes, it concerned me when I saw it. I think
because it is me too.
Yeah, and I think it's the nature of maybe the networks that received the survey and the kind of outreach we did or didn't do.
Exactly.
So it's concerning, but I think when we look at the actual recommendations, we could see, because if we noticed that there was a difference between how BIPOC people responded versus other folks, then, and maybe the data analysts would be able to tell us the precise answer to that, that would suggest maybe we need to do more. But when we look at the data, you'll see it was kind of overwhelming in positive responses. So I think it is the nature of the outreach. And Barb asked, how was outreach done? Sam, do you want to sort of give a brief outline of that?
Sure. So folks who, and I would also just share back the 336 responses add to the 250 that PCCEP received in the first round of public comment, and your town hall report outs. So remember the breakouts for that. So in total, I think PCCEP received over 600 responses to help develop and finesse the recommendations. Outreach on this specific round was, so we had the people who submitted the comments to the map app. So they received personal emails if they, with the email address that they put in. And then we used some of the listservs in the city bureaus. And then we also asked council offices to promote the opportunity. Some of those commissioner offices conveyed back that they did. I think you may have seen this on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. And trying to think of the other formal channels that we used.
Didn't you
And
outreach?
early on in the first round, I think there was, I'd say it's more ad hoc, but we had a list of organizations that Chair Young had provided, coupled with a number of community-based organizations that had submitted advocacy letters relating to abolition, police reform, racial justice, business district safety, neighborhood association safety. And so it seemed like there could be potential overlap there as well. So we e-blasted to that list of stakeholders as well.
Okay, so let's go on to the recommendations and then we could circle back to this later. You're on mute, Taji.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to get to the right tab too. Okay, cool. So here is, sorry didn't put it in the slide so it's all pretty, but it's very clear on the summary page, the information. So just going right into it, the first one is the access to addiction and mental health, access to addiction and behavioral health resources, sorry. And there was an overwhelming majority who were supportive of this. And I'll note some of the bigger, all of them are over 50% in support, but I'll note some of the ones that are a little bit more split if folks are interested. Next one here is, and let me know throughout, please, if you want to have any questions or any comments or anything. Access to services. Oh, one other thing to note, sorry, lightly, is some people didn't respond to some of the prompts, and we can't do anything about that because we made them all optional, so that might change a little bit too. One was as low as 192, I believe. PCCEP is considering recommending that the city increase access to unsheltered and houseless community resources, which is supportive of this. Pretty overwhelming support there as well. Next one is PCCEP is considering recommending a more rapid citywide expansion of the Portland Street Response Program. Also had some of the highest support on the first three here. Then it goes down a little more. So access to mental and behavioral health resources. PCCEP is considering recommending the city ensure the behavioral health unit remains fully funded. This one's still 66%, but a little bit more split. Next is ECIT training, increasing that, still pretty split, or not split, it's definitely over 62%, but there's a 20 or 30 or so split between the different options. Next one is increasing the public safety support specialist capacity. Pretty over 62% support there with a little bit of split as well. I keep saying split, but it doesn't seem like the right term. It's not really split. It's more of just, there's a better term for it that probably a research analyst could use that I don't know.
It looks more equally divided amongst the rest.
Yeah.
Like a little more, equally split amongst the rest.
Yeah. Well, what I would note though is I would lump together 6 and 7 because those are both strong. Those are both support. And if you do that, then you're talking, if it's, about 60 to 90% for all of these. So it's, if you go to the negative views, it's much smaller. I mean, a real minority of responses.
Yeah. So here's the PS3s. Oh, this is a different PS3 one though. It'd be restructuring the enhanced service district patrols. This one had a decent amount of folks who said 1, but still pretty not split. If you consider in total, that'd be 66%, 65. Down here is the long-term funding for the Office of Violence Prevention. This was had some overwhelming support as well, in the 5, 6, and 7 range. Next is on the expansion of restorative justice and diversion strategies. This also had some pretty great support as well. Next one I'm going a little fast, we can get the conversation on it, but next one is on the alternative traffic enforcement. Had about 58% plus the 13, you would consider that pretty great support there. And then increasing transparency of BOWIC or the 911 operation, also some pretty great support here. Then down here, data collection and transparency, similar here in regards to support. Folks here were a little not as supportive. I'm not as supportive, it's still in the same ballpark, but once again, a little bit spread out. And then here, down here, we have these individual responses, which I think we'll publish at a point, but people gave 129 folks just had some comments and responses. And so we have them all collated here. But yeah, that's the responses from the survey.
Yeah, I mean, my initial reaction to this is actual surprise that there is, you know, for a survey to have such unanimity, to me was surprising, which suggests, you know, that at least the people who responded to this are very supportive of the proposals that we all have come up with. Now, I think there's one thing that we have to be clear about is this is not a scientific survey. These are not weighted to reflect the populations in the city. And I think as long as we are clear about that and we just frame these results as more of a temperature check of the people who responded, then we could say that the people who responded were overwhelmingly supportive of these proposals. I wouldn't go beyond that to say, to make the conclusion that, you know, 90% of Portlanders agree with our recommendations, because I think that is, we don't have any evidence for that. Let's stop before we get onto the data analysts and see if there are any initial questions about any of this. Sean.
I mean, obviously this isn't a scientific survey and it's not weighted, but is there any discussion about weighting it to more closely match the city population, the kind of, this in case there is, you know, certain, I mean, as you showed, it's pretty heavily white and pretty high income, a lot of the people answering. So
yeah, I mean, I think the data analysts will respond to that, but, you know, the city demographics are actually 77% white, I think. So it is slightly overweighted in terms of white.
It's 77% if you include Hispanics as white.
Oh, okay.
It's about 70% without, if you actually divide Hispanic, because the US Census data uses race and ethnicity as two separate things.
Right. I mean, the other thing is we had 10% of the people say who didn't identify, which, you know, skews everything. But I think that's a good question, and I think well, maybe do you all, Aisha and Adam, do you want to speak to that now?
Before that, real quickly, I would just say that what we were asked to do in the 19-point plan was not make a proportional. We weren't asked to get the community's response and input in a proportion to the city, just because that would require what I doubt any city bureau has ever done in regards to their surveys, at least in regards to, as well as proportion to the city. But I mean, I'm not a, I just also want to make sure that we're focusing on how we take these recommendations forward. And I think that the 129 responses and comments will provide other background to that. But I mean, I similarly share a little bit of a, you know, skepticism with the sort of breakdown, but I don't know if now Adam or Aisha, if you had either thoughts on this.
Taji, if I may, real quick. What I also noticed as you were going through, because I worked on a 5-county survey and we ran into the same problems trying to get it dispersed for, you know, information gathering. So it's not uncommon, but my question was around if we look at incomes over 100,000, odds are the individuals who answered these questions would have to kind of know what the question was about in order to be in agreement with it. So my concern also is, are we presenting information at, I would say, a very wide range of reading levels and understanding levels, so that if someone who wasn't making $100,000, say they were houseless, right, and wanted to answer the survey, but they knew nothing about the program, how could we get answers from people who may not even understand what these recommendations mean? So
Yeah.
that's something else that's going through my head, is making it in a way that as many people as possible can be aware of what it is we're trying to recommend. So maybe a 8th grade reading level or something, I don't know, but that's what I've run into, is educational level also matters.
Well, we have
You-
the document, and on our background document articulates the background on the different programs for folks who, if they're not aware of what they do or their functions and or what they're commenting on, they have access. In the press release, we made sure it's clear that folks should take a look at the background document, because it would be hard if I was going in blind to or not even going in blind, but just really not aware of the even landscape of the city. So hopefully that document can supplement that, Amy, but yeah.
Thanks.
I think that's if my memory serves me right, is I think the value of round one, the questions were simpler, right? Or it was direct. PCEP's direction to staff was, we need to get a pulse on what's happening in the community and what are the needs when it comes to public safety. And that was the open-ended questions that were posed to community members. And then based on that, based on the 250 responses and the town hall conversations, that helped develop the recommendations for the second round. So I think, to Amy's point though, how do we connect the feedback loop? So to make sure that we are ground truthing the recommendations with the folks PCEPT engaged. So is that right, Amy? Like, how is that what you're?
Well, actually, what I'm
focusing on?
looking at, what I'm trying to figure out is, how do we get more people engaged in having these conversations that matter to the whole city,
Mhm.
right? And not just like 5 or 6 of us talking about it, but how do we actually have conversations in the community about it, where folks might be interested if it was presented a different way, or if it was asked a different way. I keep wondering of what, we got almost 1 million people living in Portland now, damn near, or over 1 million. And we got 200 responses. Like, it doesn't sound very like, well, shot out there for the number of people we now have living in Portland, that all of this is about. Public safety is for the whole community, right?
Yeah, but I think I mean, like, I never expected to get 330,000, like 50% of the community responding to a survey. I think one way to deal with that surveyors do when they do all kinds of surveys is you take a representative sample. We didn't set out to do that, but I think that given that we have demographic data, we could weight the survey results in such a way to better represent the community. Again, I think it's like, Amy, you're raising good points. And I think it's something, when we present the results of the survey, we just have to frame it and qualify what these results mean, because, we didn't get 300,000, but we also didn't get, 8,000. In other words, it is a very small subset of engaged people who responded. And that's just the limitation of the data we have. And I think we just need to be upfront about that. But let's turn to our expert data analysts to see what they make of this data. Adam and Aisha.
Thanks. Elliot and Isha, is it okay if I get this ball rolling?
Of course. Thank you.
Hi, Mommy.
That's my little one. I can hear them both on the microphone and on through the ceiling here. Before I get into the work that we've gotten done over really the last 24 hours, just smashing a bunch of stuff out. I want to say, I appreciate that the conversations that you all are having right now, because a lot of the things that you're wrestling with, it's not unique to your situation. Like having been working with survey data and large population data sets, the same discussions that we're having right now are the same discussions that like methodologists argue about endlessly, right, with each other. So it's not like I like what Elliot said about we just have to acknowledge the limitations of the data, glean what we can from them. I like what Sam was saying, how this set of recommendations did go through a thorough process to even get those things on the board in the first place. And similar to what Taj was saying, that there are instructions, even though like I looked at the survey and it's like a cell phone contract. It's like oh God, I'll just say I'm not going to agree. As long as I don't have to read anymore. So there are things where it's going to cater to more literate, more educated people that have more time on their hands. And to be honest, my expertise is really with indigenous samples, but that same trend is there. I don't have the reference, the author and the year offhand, but I could easily email it to you all afterwards that shows that folks that take surveys on average are more English speaking, more fluent, higher educated, and that those trends hold across the board with other populations as well. And so, I think that there's a little bit, I think that's actually, we're bringing some value here looking at the qualitative data, because there's a lot more nuance in the qualitative data than there is in the quantitative. And we'll get into that in a little bit. The problem with the recommendations thing is that you really see a ceiling effect here, right? Because you're asking someone, hypothetically speaking, would you endorse this idea? And who wouldn't? They're good ideas. It would be different if you said, would you implement this thing, right? Or like if you could only pick one, which one would you pick? Like there's different strategies for getting, if you put it on a scale from 1 to 100, right? Maybe there's more variation than you would pick up than supportive, very supportive. I did do a little bit of the crunch for the data analysis. Some of my denominators are a little bit different than Taj's, but I don't think that they're of consequence. It's very, very minor. If it's okay with y'all, I'll share some of the slides. We figured it would be good for us if we had like some product, to show you. Makes it so that we don't have to say everything in Word, and then you can have it and you can use it for your own arguments or whatever later. This is meant to kind of be like, it's preliminary, but the methods are solid. You can interrogate me about any of the details, and I'll welcome you into that discussion. And the more transparent I can be, actually, the better, because you're the subject matter experts on this. You're closer to the ground to this than I am, and so even like if you were to challenge some of my definitions or something, I would yield because you know the domain, the territory, the streets. And like I said, Aisha and I, we lived in Portland. I lived in 11th and Clay for 6 years and was right in the heart there downtown. And All my family lives in Southern Oregon, Grants Pass, but you know, like we see the stuff that's in this data too. You know, like I can smell it. But I think that the qualitative data will I think it won't solve the concerns that have, like, the people have been talking about this last 20 minutes or so. But I think it'll be a little bit more refreshing than just looking at the sixes and sevens, you know, across the quantitative data. And we see that ceiling effect, you know, a lot. Like it just happens. Like it happens a lot. I did a project with my aunt has worked with disability services with indigenous populations in Oregon for 30 years. And we created a whole bunch of recommendations, did a lot of work creating a bunch of different strategies that would help Native families that have children with disabilities. And when we delivered them to a bunch of a different group of parents, a different group of Native parents with children with disabilities, to see if maybe the focus groups were unique, we tried to do a quantitative thing. We also had that ceiling effect. Folks were like, yeah, this sounds good. Yeah, this sounds good, you know, but it's different than I need this, or I'm willing to do this, you know? And so we're going to just kind of look at that endorsement as kind of a global thing, a loose commitment thing. It's still useful, right? You can still say people didn't look at it and read it and were like, well, no, screw this, right? Like there was still some positive affirmation of it. But I think the qualitative data will give us a little bit more thoughtful information. Do I have the ability to share? Yep, okay. I'm gonna try this out. All right, y'all can see, like, it looks like a pretty blank screen, pretty boring looking, no colors or anything, just the preliminary snapshots and the date. And so I'm going to talk about the Google form data because that was kind of what I was, you know, dividing Conquer, my division of labor. I took the gender, I'm sorry, I took the Google form data, and then I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Aisha Taylor, and she'll look at, discuss the map app data. So one of the things that I did, and I thought this was, you know, as a methods guy, this was just something like I had to check. It was just suspicious under my skin. I had to look at it. And so on the left side, the green stuff, that's basically the demographics that Taj reviewed earlier for the whole sample for everyone. And so you'll see, like, I got 324, not 336. I think he said that the map app data, though, was why he had the higher denominator. And then I compared that with the people that offered open-ended qualitative responses, because most didn't, right? Of the 324 survey takers, only 120 wrote something in the comment section at the end. And that stuff that they wrote at the end is what I'm going to be focusing on. There is a lot more folks from the Southeast and the Northeast taking this than, you know, you have overrepresentation there. But the people that wrote the qualitative responses were fairly similar to that. You can see, like, from a survey researcher's point of view, the people that wrote comments in the open-ended question were not like weird or different group substantially than the people that took the survey overall. Okay, so that's just a concern that we would have otherwise. The same concern that we have that the people that are taking the survey are different than the rest of Portlandiers. That's the same concern that we have for people that, like, took the survey and didn't fill out the comment section, and people that did. So we can see, you know, just looking at it, that the distribution between geographic region is around the same. Male and female is not the same, but close. Sexuality, similar. Ethnicity, similar. You know, and in that question about ethnicity, so two things real quick. One, we do want to look at the proportions of each population in Portland overall and see how closely our numbers resemble those proportions. We wouldn't expect like a 50% Black response if only a proportion. Native, indigenous folks, we deal with this all the time because statistically we're only around, we hug the 1% mark in the population rates. And, you know, and so consequently we show up around 1% in survey rates. And that's not enough. The standard errors are too big. A lot of times we get left out of the analyses, which is a real bummer. But anyways, the numbers that we're seeing here, that's my first thing that I want to say is we need to look at the population proportions in Portland before we judge our data too critically. And then the second thing, I think, let me look through here. Sean, is it, I think you had mentioned about waiting. Super good question. We won't, and we can wait, but I'll do you one better. We can actually run an analysis where we're controlling for the impact that each group's membership has on the dependent variable, and control for all of them simultaneously, which will eventually, and statistically speaking, it removes the impact of like, let's say that you know, that there's an income effect there, but that there's also a question on whether or not you've been homeless, right? Well, there's probably a little bit of overlap between those two things, right? And if we can control for that overlap, we can get a little bit better, more clear of a picture of what each thing is doing independently. This is a problem with a lot of kind of global statistics that look at like comparing, you know, races or genders or even classes, because there's a lot of other things that are in the mix, other ingredients that are important that we need to think about. And turns out, you know, we have the math and the programs to do the math for us, and so we can take those things into account. Again, it's just a snapshot, right? And that's why I titled this thing just some preliminary snapshots. It's still not the truth with the capital T, and we shouldn't confuse it for that, right? But we are getting a little bit closer to what that group represents. So we will be able to make claims, let's say, about the unique impact of income or the unique impact of gender, rather than you know, conflating. All right, so that's all I want to say about that. Our open-ended response givers were pretty similar to the other folks. For the quantitative stuff, I know that Google Forms already spits it out, but to be honest, looking across all of the frequencies was a little confusing to me. So I went ahead and averaged them. And so that's the next slide. And then with the open-ended responses, I'll talk a little bit more about what I did, or what Aisha and I, the method that we employed as we go along. But essentially, it's a way of taking small meaning units, like bricks, to build a house with, right? And so we're going to go small to large. The idea is that for each open-ended response on that survey, right? They're all in here. I guarantee it. And I'll show you the data if you want to see it. Every item, every map app data Aisha handled, every survey data I handled, we went through each one and we said, okay, what's the content in here? Okay, sometimes somebody would just write one word, right? Like defund. And then sometimes people would write these gigantic paragraphs. And it was our responsibility to distill meaning from those things in a way that was systematic so that we could talk about them here with y'all. Anyways, I'll go more into that if you all are interested, but real quickly, this is the quantitative data. So what I did was I did an average instead of frequencies, because frequencies are a little, it's just how do you interpret the difference between, you know, something that has 70% support or 70% says sevens, and then the next one, 68% says sevens, right? I mean, my mind doesn't do real well with that. So this is the recommendations ranked. You can see that the lowest one is still 5.5, still very high on the support scale, okay? So as I mentioned, if you invited me and I didn't know anything about anything, except for like the regular stats game, I'd say, oh, you have a ceiling effect here. And that's what I think that you got. But it's still interesting to see that some things are more endorsed than other things. There's still variation there, even though it's small. So, and you can, and I sent Theo these slides, so you all have these, okay? You don't have to try to write them down or memorize them or nothing. All right. Within the qualitative data.
Hold on, Adam.
Do you have something showing up on?
Yeah, hold on. Sorry, we need to remove somebody.
We got some photo bombing going on.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Sorry about that. If there are children,
Maybe stop sharing your screen, Adam.
You have to turn off the annotatability because they can, yeah.
Mm.
Sorry about that, everyone. We have it looks like it's taken care of.
I thought that was you, Theo.
Oh gosh.
Well, you were sending me mean chats in the
Not
mean
this time.
chats.
No, not this time. Next time. Okay, we're good. Sorry about that.
All right. So now I got to share my screen again. Hey, let me do this again. That was the first time I'd been photobombed like that before. Not photobombed. What do you call it?
Zoom bomb.
Zoom bomb.
Yeah.
Got the Zoom bomb. So basically, there was 127 people out of the 321 surveys that I had. From those 127 responses, we got 320 different like individual sentences, right? Individual meaning units, individual comments. From those individual meaning units, I was able to identify 55 different codes to represent them. But a bunch of those codes were similar in their content, right? Maybe somebody said, oh, I want body cams. And then somebody else said, oh, I want higher accountability. And then somebody else said, well, listen, I want more, police beating the streets. Well, like if there was similarity in content, then these things would be clustered together, hey? And so I'll show you on the next slide what this is. But basically, there was 5 different clusters of meaning in here, all right? So this is it's a way of looking at a whole lot of data and then trying to like incrementally move up from the grass right up to the trees. And so this is the 4 big themes that we found, and you can see the percentages there. I put the percentage in there because I'm trying to be as transparent as possible about who this represents and who this doesn't. Okay, if I didn't have the percentages in there, then maybe you think everybody thinks this, right? Going back to Amy's point, just being very doubtful that 60 or 70% of the population of Portland all agrees uniformly with all these recommendations. Well, it turns out that they didn't, even in this data, and they said so in the comments section. The most frequently endorsed, and frequency in the qualitative world is not a proxy for value and importance, but sometimes it's convenient to think about it like that. It's something that independently different people talked about. So support for alternative services for the policing. Lots of people endorsed this in their comments. They were like, yes, we want other things other than just the police being the only solution for our homeless problem, for our mental health problems, for our food problems, for our shelter problems, transportation problems. A lot of this came up, a lot of recommendations for other things. When we asked, I was looking through the comments, a lot of times this was very vague in general. It was just like, yeah, put money towards other services. And so I called that generalized support. You can see that kind of on the left there underneath that first bubble. Restructuring responsibility. Again, a lot of folks didn't have details, right? I mean, a lot of folks that are responding to this, they're saying yes to the survey. They're clicking through. They're like, that idea sounds good to me. That idea sounds good to me. Now let me tell you about my problem that I'm having in my backyard, right? And that's kind of what the comments are showing here. So people are saying, yeah, you know what? We want mental health problems to be addressed by somebody other than like the institution that's responsible for managing criminal activity. Yeah, we want that. Prioritizing mental health was a next big one. Prioritizing homelessness was the fourth one. And there's more data in here, but I figured all of the little squares underneath the bubbles here represent about 70% of the data within each bubble. Okay, so like I didn't want to kill you with the details, but there is, we could have fleshed it out all the way to 100%, but I only fleshed it out to the 70% because it worked out to where there was in between 5 and 6 recommendations that took up the bulk of any one given. I would argue that these are kind of like the people's recommendations, and to be honest, how well they fit in with PCCEP's recommendations, I don't, you know them way better than I do, so I don't have a slide saying like they've supported you here, they didn't support you here. Like I feel like these things need to be interpreted within your own knowledge, like because you got the knowledge, you got the on the ground knowledge, and I don't, right? I just have this survey. Community policing programs. So there was a bunch of mentions about like Portland Street response and other either community programs or like grassroots programs, nonprofit programs that came up. Like, yeah, like, you know, what about people taking care of their own communities? The second big bubble was this policing reforms. There's an n/in on here, and if you look at the slide before, it's because a lot of the phrasing of this was either neutral or negative. So sometimes people would recommend these policing reforms with a little bit of like anger in the comment, right? Frustration in the comment. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that there was these different energies in the data. So within the policing reforms, from people that were kind of frustrated with things, they say, listen, you know, we need to have police building better relationships with the community, walking the beat, not armed, like getting to know people in encounters that don't involve crime. We want more training for officers to have mental health, like more police officer mental health training. It would be great if there was like an unarmed responders unit, because the presence of weapons makes everybody agitated. A concern about police accountability and transparency. And one of the reform ideas that came out, there was a bunch of good ideas, to be honest with you, man. Like folks had like a lot of really concrete, detailed ways of improving. And one of them was a citizen review board, rather than having police review their own bad apples or whatever. And then increased accountability. This was phrased both, sorry, I see Amy raised her hand.
Yeah, this is like amazing information. But I have to get my brain realigned, because prioritizing homeless at 9%, what is that based off, like 127 responses or 300? How many responses is that percentage based off of?
So that's actually 9% of 36%, right? Because only 30%, this is like people independently, voluntarily throwing in qualitative responses. Like there was that open-ended question. Hell, I can look up the data for you though, if you want to know. It's a very small percentage. If you look at all of the 127.
Right, that's what I was thinking. I'm like, wait a minute, houselessness is a huge problem in Portland, and yet such a small amount of people, I guess, recognize it as a priority percentage. I don't know. It's that and the mental health. Because when I look over to the other columns, people are wanting like 14% mental health care or whatever. So we're getting larger responses on the mental health supports on other columns. I guess that's what's confusing me. I'm like,
Sure. And this is something that we'll try to like articulate well in the report.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, your data is great. I just was trying to figure out if what the like base percentage value that was from, like 9%.
Sure. So
Like really low in my mind. So
So in the quantitative data, like surveys, there's a belief that if you have a representative sample, that is the truth, that it represents what's going on in the real world. Okay. And then with qualitative data, in the real world, this might be more important. It might be less important, but what's important for us is that it's there at all. So, we're not saying, I threw the percentages on there for transparency, not for generalization. And
okay. Okay. Yeah, no, I was told that after the first 50, things start repeating. So I totally hear you. I learned a lot a few years ago about data analysis, and they say the patterns start repeating after a certain sample amount. So you're right. I thought it was 50, might be 100.
So if you're looking at all 321 separate comments that people made, remember only 127 people put comments on there, but some people put like lots of things, right? So we separated each one of them, treated each sentence as its own idea. So there was 321 separate ideas. Only 3% of those were about homelessness.
Wow.
But on the flip side, out of 321 independent comments where people were just describing their own experiences, most of the things, like 1, 2, 3%. I know it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but if you ask a bunch of people something and nobody says anything, and you get like these, like it's actually significant that it came up at all, right? It could have been neglected. It could have been like people, this is not their concern. And so our burden is not to say, well, 9% of Portlandier people in Portland care about prioritizing homelessness. That wasn't the goal. It was that 9% of people who said, I want other services, mentioned prioritizing homelessness. There was also recommendations to clean up graffiti and garbage. There's recommendations to to create poverty programs, transportation services, automated traffic enforcement so that police and people who violate traffic rules don't have to interact, food programs, social service increase funds, educational programs, restorative justice approaches, prioritizing addiction, crime diversion, community-based police services, prioritizing homelessness, mental health, restructuring and reforms to policing, and prioritizing social services over policing. That was the full gamut of things that were included when people said, I want something other than policing.
And just Adam, if I could interject real quick, in the map app data, just as a sneak preview, the focus on mental health services and houselessness was much higher. It's like number 2 and number 4 in terms of themes of the data. So you'll see that soon in the map app data.
Yeah, and so like maybe we can mosey along to that. I want to get to that map, or I want Aisha to get to that map app data. Let me maybe just like a global kind of look at this. So the things that came up the most, people said, yes, we want alternatives to policing. Yes, we want reforms to like bring accountability and transparency to the police. There was a second set of police reforms where they were saying, we want more cops. We're worried about our safety. That's that police reforms 2 is what I called it, that 4th bubble. People saying, listen, that we already have homeless programs. We already have food shelters. Like it's not making it better. And so that there's a different set that are they're not saying we need more transparency and more accountability. We're saying we need more presence of police. There's 2 different streams of police reforms being requested by people out there. And then that third one, the police funding, that actually went in 2 directions, where some people were saying the police need to be funded at least a minimum amount, like they need adequate funding. Like right now they're underfunded, and there's some people did their homework and stuff. They're like put on into their comments. They're like, compare our number of police to other cities of our size, and there's not as many, and that might be a reason why they're failing. And then people might think that the police are not doing a good job because there's not enough. I don't know. I'm not the arbiter of truth here. This is just what folks are saying. So there's some folks saying for funding, yes, we need more funding for the police, or at least keep it what it is. And then there's this constituency of folks. If you said anything about funding, about 73% of those of you would say something negative. That might be to defund the police completely, or at least to reduce their funds. Some people didn't say the words reduce. They didn't say the words defund. What they would say is like no more money. And then some folks said, well, if there's money to be spent, maybe spend it on the police, but don't prioritize the police every time. Prioritize some of these other services that we mentioned too. The last thing was this miscellaneous one, and this one was just like a bucket for stuff I didn't know where else to put it. One of them was a bunch of people thanking you, thanking the committee, thanking the people that came up with the recommendations, and then thanking whoever wrote the survey for even the opportunity to make comments. I thought I'd give you all a shout out. There was another one, reoccurring theme where people said, please don't implement new ideas without some evidence-based practices, either testing the implementations themselves or not using strategies that haven't been tested elsewhere. There was a handful of comments that called upon political leaders to ramp their game up. And interestingly, some folks were saying this on the conservative side and some people were saying this on the liberal side, both people saying, look, that politicians need to step it up. There was a handful of comments that were related to specific locations, about 17% of them. And then there was also complaints about the survey itself. So some people said, listen, you know, there's no cost benefit analysis here. You're just asking us to endorse recommendations. Like, what if it costs more and it doesn't work as good? These questions are leading or confusing, or there's too much reading. And so there was a little bit of people complaining about that. And then there was a small portion that gave positive shout outs to the police. So I already mentioned the task at hand. I'm just throwing out to you what I've found so far. You know, whether or not this influences the recommendations at all or adds caveats to them, it's up to y'all. You know, we mentioned all the concerns earlier. Like, I thought it was interesting. You know, when I looked at that average income, you can see it on the bottom there. If you use the average instead of looking at the split, right? Because we were talking about that split earlier. The average income is 80 to 100 grand. Right? The people that respond to the survey, generally speaking, are not the folks that are using the services. And so I will be following up in the future analyses. I will separate the results for people that report income less than, I can't remember what the lowest cutoff was, but I will look at that stuff. And we'll also look at like whether or not someone's reported having experienced homelessness. We'll look to see if their answers differ. And even with the qualitative data that we've gotten, because we use content analysis is super cool because you basically create qualitative data that you count. So you get a little bit of numerical information in there too. And what we can do is we can statistically look at, like, we can compare, are these people different beyond what we would expect from chance? And so we can do that even in the qualitative data. It'll be a subset for sure. And you know, and the more than I can say this, like I teach classes in research methods and I try to drive this home all the time. It's like, this research is just information. We're trying to be as smart about it as we can. It is not the same thing as the real world, right? And so, you know, factor it in, weigh it amongst all of your other vested interests. You know, we'll do our best to make sure that the data is analyzed correctly. But you know, we shouldn't like fall for that trap, like where, well, you know, this is what it says, and so that's the way that it is.
Any questions for Adam's presentation before I hop into the map app data?
No,
Yeah,
I mean, thank you.
I only have one quick question, and that is, when I'm looking at your presentation of information with the circles, it really, you know, makes a lot of sense. And I'm just kind of wondering if it might be more receptive without the percentages listed, like just as text, because it was very clear based on how you laid it out what the people thought was important. But the percentages in my mind caused confusion because it was based on a different set of values than, you know, like what I would be imagining. And I'm just a consumer. So, The data is awesome, okay? But the numbers get a little confusing. That's where I'm at when it comes to this kind of information sharing. So I
So
just want to put it out there.
sure. And I'll defer to you. And I think that you know better than I do about how to use this. And so I think if taking it, those percentages off there is better for, and you know, I'm just giving this to you. If you were to give it to somebody else, you can definitely take those percentages off of there. One of the reasons why I put it on is because there's a criticism of qualitative data. Like, let's just refer to the example, like the need for more police. I think it would be inappropriate for me, knowing the data, that was just a small proportion of the population, to say, look, this is on equal footing as this thing that a larger majority of of our sample talked about. So I feel like it's partly just like kind of, as a number cruncher, it's kind of my responsibility to let you know that some things were talked about more than others.
Maybe what Amy is referring to is the actual just number. Like maybe we could visually represent that by having a smaller bubble for police, you know, and then that gets away from the quantitative thing, but it will represent the idea that more people said this than that.
Sure.
If I could make a suggestion too, something else you could do is, because right now you have those percentages of the percentage of a category for the total, and then the percentages of the subcategory within the category.
Yeah.
And that confuses people pretty quickly, I can see. Just having the percentages of the subcategories be the percentage of the overall as opposed to each separate category would kind of give people a better sense of how much those relate to each other across everything.
In the report, there'll be both. In the report, you'll have how often does this thing come up within its own like thematically related theme, and how much does this thing come up across the board, and it'll be in a table, and then you can look at it. You can say, oh, well, yeah, you know, across the board, it came up pretty infrequently, but of all the solutions, of all the alternative police strategies that people offered, this was the one that they came up with the most, and it's a stark difference, you know. We'll try to give you, and if you have any other recommendations like that, I love them, you know, send them our way. We want it to be as usable as possible.
Thanks. Yeah, Aisha, why don't you hit us up, because we do have a 7 o'clock ending point, and we do want to spend the last few minutes talking about next steps.
Perfect. Good. Well, I'm happy to share, happy to follow that awesome presentation. Thanks so much, Adam. So, yep, you can see here again, just initial analysis as Adam was talking about with the survey. Adam talked a good bit about the content analysis, so I won't say too much here other than what we like to say about it is that it's quantifying qualitative data. So it's turning words into numbers. And so that's the kind of cool thing that we like about this method, content analysis. So you can see here that there were 257 messages taken from the map app data from that website that we were sent. And because there were a number of repeated messages, or one person said basically the same thing, 3 different messages, those were combined into 251. So that's what we're talking about here, is 251 messages. Adam did a lot of talking about this. I think the one thing I'll mention this is that, so within like one message, there could be 7, 9 different codes, different kind of blocks of meaning. That brick that Adam mentioned that builds the house, so kind of a brick of meaning, there were 655 of those. And so that is a lot of data. And so then what we looked at and what I'll present here is kind of the number of comments that were mentioned in each theme that we came up with, each category, and then what that percentage was of the overall. Okay, anything on this slide, any questions? You'll see Adam is from the academic side, and I have come from more the practitioner consulting. So formatting is everything to me. So you see the green and all that stuff. All right, so the 3 main categories map very similarly onto what Adam showed you with the bubbles. And let's see, so you see the kind of the first main category here is police defunding, reallocation of police funds, and alternative services to policing. That's the main one. You see mental health support. Here is the first one that comes up, addressing race, poverty, queer bias in policing, seeing those three main topics coming up over and over in the map app data, bias in policing. Addressing the root causes of houselessness and over policing of the houseless. Expanding unarmed community responses and services. This was actually the #1 theme. I'll show you on the next slide. And then that redirecting funds away from the police. So these are all sub themes of this overall category, right? And then finally, we do have some feedback on your specific recommendations that kind of flesh out some of the information in the survey that Adam and Taji shared. And then finally, a few folks did talk about, all right, we just need to disband or abolish the police. And I have numbers on the next slide. The next main category, police reforms, walk the beat more, build that relationships in the community, have a police presence, demilitarize the police. The police need more accountability, more training, addressing gun violence, and then using traffic photos instead of armed police stops. Third main category, police funding. So this was kind of that grouping that Adam talked about, where there was a group of people who talked about applauding the work of the police, like being very supportive of the police, and then increased funding and resources for the police as well. And then finally, I wasn't sure whether to put this in police reforms over here. So needing body cameras. Main categories. Here is the meat and potatoes right here. So these are the 15 themes we found in the map app data, separate from the specific feedback to the recommendations. That'll be the next slide. So if you're looking for that, that's coming. So here you see #1, right? Expand unarmed community responses and services, 147 comments of the 655 coded pieces, which was 22%. Adam's taking care of the kids now. This is #1, right? That came up so many times. That talked about everything from poverty services to solutions for houselessness, etc. #2 here is addressing the root causes, that should say houselessness and over policing of the houseless. Again, so there's that, Amy, to your question. This is the #2 most often theme that came up in the map app data at 15% of the overall comments. Redirecting funds away from police. You can see the numbers. That was really about, and that was very specific. So Adam mentioned that too, and he and I talked a little bit about that as we were going through the data. Sometimes people said, oh, we need to make sure we have these community responses and services based on mental health and healthcare and all of these things. And sometimes they were very explicit and said, and in order to fund those services and responses, move money away from the police. But sometimes they didn't. So we have that in the data as well. Mental health support comes in huge at #4 with 58%, number of comments, 9%. And then so here's that positive piece, right? So all 3 of the categories that I talked about before are in these 15 themes. So all 3 of these categories are kind of interspersed throughout. Because that was something that we had talked, that you had wanted to know, like what percentage of people are really supporting the police and wanting them, instead of diverting funds away, giving more, like hiring more people because there's not enough police officers, that kind of sentiment. So that's #5 with 53, 53 and 8%. So addressing that bias in policing, that comes in at #6. Needing more accountability and training for police. I combined those just because there were 15 themes and they were often said together. So 5% of the data there. Demilitarize the police, another 5%. Police needing to develop relationships, walk the beat, get and have a presence in community neighborhoods, 4%. So we're getting pretty low, right? So 4%, 3 and on. There was a little bit of the critique of the process. So these links are confusing, and the comments around the presentation was thinking like, so I guess in one of the presentations, it's the crime data stopped at 2017. And so then people were saying, well, what about the spike that we saw in 2020? And so that stuff always comes up. But again, only 3%. Disband or abolish the police was also very low at 3%. Applaud or supporting the police, low at 2%. Using the traffic radar, just kind of a suggestion that came up a number of times, 11, thought that was kind of, it's a very specific thing, right? So, and then addressing gun violence, 1.5%, police needing body cameras. Any questions here? Okay, I'll keep moving. I'll keep an eye on the chat too. All right, so then this was about your specific recommendations. I broke these out because I thought this was really interesting. And I know this is kind of some of what you were looking at with the qualitative survey data. So the number one theme here was around the Portland Street response being a really promising start. And that language was used a lot. Either it's a great start, it's a good beginning, because there's more people that are needed within that, more training needed within that, and more funding. So people are like, yeah, it's a good start, but it needs to be fleshed out a lot more. 80, and in this one, you can see the total here is there were 138 kind of bricks of meaning for these PCCEP recommendations. And so that's broken out. The percentages are broken out based on those 138.
I just want to make clear,
yeah,
Aisha, that for this first map app, we hadn't yet had recommendations. So
okay.
Our recommendations were developed based on this, but they didn't have those recommendations from us. But I think these are just things floating in the air.
Yeah, that came out. Okay, thank you. That's good to know. Helpful. Clean and safe is it was talked about by the respondents as a privatized extension of policing and just get rid of it. They didn't like it. 29 comments focused on that at 21% of these 138. The third recommendation around the PS3, I think that's the abbreviation. They received a lot of mixed risk support. So you see that I have it broken down here. There were 5 folks who talked about it positively. Yes, we need these folks to do more. There were 7 who were at 4 who were negative, like, nope, we don't need this. They're part of the police. Nope, let's just get rid of it. And then there were 7 who were mixed in terms. They said, well, it could be good, but there's only 12 people, or they could be good, but there's not enough training. They don't have crisis response training. They don't have de-escalation training, and they don't know how to handle folks in crisis. They don't have that training. And so if we give them that training, that would be great. Or if we take them out of the police department, this could be a solution. But really the focus was on unarmed responses for the people who spoke about those alternative policing solutions. And then fourth here, the Portland navigation teams were not seen as a good solution, thinking in the context of houselessness, because it was just, they come in here and try to get people out before the big sweeps come in. And that's not an alternative. That's just moving people around and upsetting them and their place of dwelling. So that's for the PCCEP recommendations. And one of the things that we'll do in the report is that for each of these themes here, and then for these 15, we'll have kind of a definition of what does each theme mean, and then example comments. We just didn't have time to put this together yet today, but that's really important, because then you can see people's words, and that's really powerful. And the stories that were shared were just really harrowing on all sides and all different perspectives. I think about, in terms of the police needing more funding, this one here, number 5, stories about, just people being scared in their own house and not coming, as I'm sure you've heard. And then in terms of needing more accountability and training, lots of stories around the Black Lives Matter protests and how police were treating people, pushing them to the ground, knocking their head into, just really harrowing. And so I think that's where the heart of the information comes out. So I'm sorry I wasn't able to get that for you today, but hopefully this will be just a good start.
Thank you. This, I want to thank both Adam and Aisha. This is amazing analysis, and I think it's really helpful to gives us a lot more to work with than just the data from the survey. And I think this will be useful also to present to the community. So my questions for both of you is, are we able to weight based on the demographic data and the responses to try to get a somewhat more accurate picture than we have?
Yeah, Absolutely. Yeah, Adam talked about that a lot at the end of the presentation. So seeing if people respond differently based on income, based on race, ethnicity, based on where they live in Portland, all of that. Yeah, we'll do that analysis. Is that what you're asking, Elliot?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Just to see if it's gonna like dramatically skew what the sort of general impressions that we get. But I think it's really helpful to have. I mean, we know that there are people who want to increase police funding, and you know, just to see sort of how representative that was in our sample.
Elliot, real quick, because
Yeah.
it's kind of important. One is the one thing I noticed that is missing that's really relative to community input is age. Okay, the categories of age, they don't have to be specific, but I mean, as far as like, you know, young adults, mid adults, you know, there's the 45 to 55. I mean, there's all kinds of age groups whose decisions may change on how they see services. You know, as we get older, our needs change and our thinking changes. So age would be something that I would ask that we might look into in the future, is like not only demographics, but what is the age of the population and where are they living? You know, like, are they living out in Gresham? Are they living, you know, in Southwest? Like, where are the people living that fit the different age groups? And the other is on that last form, there's a PCCEP isn't spelled right. It was PPCEP. So there's a spelling error in the title. So I don't know if anyone else caught that, but on Aisha's document, PCCEP wasn't
I got
spelled
it.
right.
I got it, Amy.
Okay.
Fix that. No worries. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I didn't know if anyone else saw that, but I just thought, oh, that looked really different.
So we unfortunately didn't ask the age question. I think that would have been really interesting to have, but we did ask the geography question, so we can break it down by neighborhood and get a sense of sort of where people are from in terms of and how they responded. We have about 10 minutes left. I do want to talk about our next steps. So are there any other specific questions while we have Adam and Aisha here? Yeah, Sean.
I just have a comment, kind of an observation, given some of the other research has been coming out lately from other sources. And I think it's this, in the report, it's important that it kind of gets emphasized that this is qualitative analysis of qualitative data. And obviously there's a certain amount level of bias that comes into it, because the people who want to answer it tend to be the people with stronger feelings on things. And the reason I'm thinking about this is if you go to the city council meetings and hear the public comment, it's very heavily on the defund side. But then there was a recent city survey that came out through DHM, which does a lot of the surveys in the city, that showed an opposite result. And it's kind of, how do you get those two things, you know, an understanding of how that flipping and flopping, depending upon how it's done, is accounted for. If that makes any sense. I'm kind of rambling there.
Oh, it definitely makes sense. And we'll definitely include that in the analysis. I think you're right. And I think that will be fleshed out in some of the comments, because some were like, you saw, like, abolish the police, disband it. And then others were like, no, give it all the money it needs, just throw money at it. And so it's like getting both extremes. And there was a lot in the middle. But I feel like I definitely hear what you're saying, Sean, and we'll make sure to address that in terms of who went to the site, found how to give information, and then gave these messages. A lot of them were very long too. This was not like 2 lines. Some of them were 2 lines, but a lot of them were very long and intricate. There were attachments. People sent reports. People cited studies. People sent links to articles. It was really impressive, the level of research people had done on this.
So one thing that's, I think, the advantage of our recommendations is we don't really take on the defund issue at all. We sidestep it and try to get to that consensus group in the middle, which is like, what are the alternatives? And I think the strategy going forward is to sidestep completely the defund question and just focus on what does the community want as alternatives, and recognize that there is a group of people who wants to defund completely and abolish the police. There's also a group of people who wants to increase funding, but what we're talking about is the people in the middle. Okay, so let's, my computer might die. If it does, you'll know why. So if we bring this to City Council, one of the things that Taji and I were talking to Sam about is the form that we bring it in. And one of the things that I was worried about was that if we just bring it as, here are recommendations, and they kind of pat us on the head and say, oh, those are nice, you know, thank you very much. And then they just go on with their business, we wouldn't have accomplished much. So what I want to figure out is a way to get them on the record publicly in some kind of agree or disagree with either the package of recommendations or the specific recommendations. And we're talking to Sam about how that could be done. One idea is some kind of general resolution. These aren't phrased in such a way that they could be passed and then money is going to be allocated tomorrow to do something. But if we could get them to say, we approve of these general recommendations, and then we were talking about getting them to task Mike Myers with sort of the implementation, figuring out how to implement the recommendations going forward, that would be something at least where we could see some progress. So I don't know if people had other ideas or comments about that. Amy?
The one thing I'm noticing, Elliot, is like, we all like it now, pretty and simple, you know, like make it pretty and make it fairly simple. And I would love to see like the recommendation be kind of surrounded by what the people said. Like, here's what the people said. You know, we could do that kind of statement around the recommendation and then list maybe 5 of the major comments that the public, you know, came up with, or categories. The 5 categories that the public came up with would at least show them that our recommendations are being moved forward based upon information from the community.
Yeah, that's absolutely key, is when we present this, that we frame this, which is true, that this is deducted from these community forums, from these survey results. Yes. And at the appendix to this report is going to be where all this data is put, qualitative comments, the quantitative comments, the analysis. And so it's not PCCEP saying this. We're just coalescing what we heard from the community. And I think you're right, picking out some of the key comments that illustrate that from the community members.
And making it connect to the, you know, recommendation, both the positive and, you know, some other sides, like some say defund and the rest say fund. You know, we need to show a little bit of both, so we're not biased in our presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
One proposal that I had to Sam and Elliot, and I want to know what everyone else was thinking about, is if we had the June meeting with the city council, and we propose it as a report that has a sort of, the part that they vote on maybe is a resolution to take the report and have a implementation work session post voting on approving or not approving either the entire thing or sections. So we can't decide if they'll do the whole thing or sections, but what we can say is we don't want there to be a resolution paired with the report that says that city council will meet. It doesn't even need to be a resolution, or it could be, I don't know, it could be whatever. But that would say that the city council will meet with PCCEP and the community who's been working on this, you know, as a means of discussing the implementation of the recommendations that were voted and approved. So that could be of any number of the sections. But I think that's one idea. And then one other idea I'll throw out, I think Sam said this, was that we are gonna hopefully meet with Mike Myers and folks from the budget office and meet and discuss implementation from that perspective, and have that be our Mike be our like sort of lead in moving this work forward as it relates to his other already existing initiatives he has going on in his new role. So those are two ideas. Don't know how folks feel about that, but I wanted to throw it out. I don't even know if either of them are like, I mean, I don't think any of them, both of them are viable, right? Sam, like neither of them are like out of the question or something, right? I don't know.
And I think all of these ideas, like these aren't mutually exclusive ideas. Having the city council vote to approve or not approve these recommendations and then agreeing to a work session as a means towards implementation, you know, along with Mike Myers sort of leading the effort would, you know, I think those all work well together.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, is anyone here opposed or have other ideas, Sean?
I'm not opposed. Kind of what I'm thinking, and this is something that was in discussion clear back in last July, is there's no sense of any type of long-term vision for what public safety should look like in this city. And what I'd really like to see out of city council is some kind of resolution, at least recognizing this is the direction we as a community want to take it. We want to see more alternatives to policing. We want to see better investment in records and investment so we can actually do the big analysis we need to do to really dig into our little problems. We don't, you know, we want to see less privatized people working in our cities, big things like that. And then we can kind of drill down in these little recommendations from there. But I think the big focus should be on these big ideas that are getting really broad support, and just getting the city council to say, yes, we have a resolution that this is the direction we are going to move in from here on out.
With the entire recommendation was that all of the recommendations together are pushing the city council to move in that direction towards public safety. The ways we were proposing it has some of those solutions. You're right though, Sean. Long term though, I'm really leaning on Mike to better synthesize and create a stronger existing public safety entity, because I know that he's already working to cut budgets from what they could make it more efficient. You know, those, I know he presented at our council meeting last month. And I really think that the county also should be involved if we're talking about public safety. And I have opinions on a one-person initiative I'm working on, not at all, but this idea of like having joint efforts with the county and the city on gun violence. And it's just a personal idea that I keep saying, and one day maybe someone will think that's a really good idea. But yeah, I think that we have to have a public health approach to, sorry, there's my mom in the background, but yeah, that was basically it. Didn't know.
Yes, my concern is it kind of mirrors a concern that Lakiana brought up, is that if we try to dig too down in the weeds on some of these recommendations, then you'll have people start picking apart, well, this one we don't think will happen at all, so let's just not even talk about this at all. And I think that's the biggest danger we have here, is we can't get too down into the weeds because as the public themselves couldn't get too down in the weeds just because of the knowledge base, the time, and the huge amount of stuff involved.
We're running up on the clock, and I know Elliot just got back in ironically, but I want to, you know, is anyone else who has comments on how we'll move forward with the, oh, Adam, yeah, go ahead.
If it's okay to throw in a couple of cents. You know, I mean, I think the quantitative data that you have, you know, representation problems and ceiling effects all considered, you do still have pretty widespread endorsement for these recommendations. You know, and I think that I guess I'm wondering what the timeline is for this, because I know you have to go and you want to make your case and you want to do it, you know, within like the bureaucratic timelines that already exist. You know, but I guess I'm just thinking like it would be interesting to see an organizational analysis and to say, okay, well, some of these recommendations are more close within our reach than other recommendations. And it doesn't mean we won't fight them. Maybe we have to think about them, you know, as in 10 years, we're going to address that one. But in this one, we'll work on that one this month, you know, and kind of thinking about it like not like, because I think the qualitative data really speaks to the fact that these recommendations are not the only story, right? That there's a lot of other concerns, a lot of other nuances. There's a lot of like specific things. I thought, you know, and we'll try to do our best and you know, trying to get all the details to you from the data into the report. But you'll see that there's a whole breadth of different like concrete recommendations that people make from, you know, their backyards. The other thing I was thinking, and to be honest, I wouldn't want to do it. But one of the things that you could do is look at the recommendations that you have, like a grid, like a matrix, have each recommendation, and then take the themes that we identified in the qualitative, put that on the other axis of the matrix, and see where the things that people are talking about organically from the qualitative data, where those things are mapping on to the more imposed structural things. Because you asked, like, do you agree with this or not, right? Do you support this or not? So those are your skeletons. And then you got all the flesh and meat that's growing on it from the organic. And you can see how much overlap there is as kind of an indirect way of seeing endorsement from the qualitative data. But like I said, it's not that I wouldn't want to do it because it's technically difficult. It's because I don't have the knowledge domain. It's really, I would want to hand that matrix to you and have you say, okay, how much do these recommendations that we heard, because you did that first part where you garnered these recommendations from, was it town halls and focus groups and stuff?
Well, it's actually the first map app data was an open-ended question. So it's that stuff that Aisha was analyzing is where that in the town halls is where we came up with the recommendations.
I thought the vision thing, Sean, I thought you hit that right on. I mean, you know, a system of handling civil disputes and stuff that takes into account these other issues that, you know, are salient in the Portland community. I mean, it's a good vision, I think. You know, it's like, okay, look, we have police and they do their police job and the police job is necessary. But a lot of times it's more complicated than just, is this person committing a crime or not? You know, like that's a more sensitive tailoring of a criminal justice system to the needs of its population. Time will tell whether or not that's better for the society than, you know, some strict rule iron fist or something. You know, people are wild animals sometimes.
Yeah, no, I think the philosophical perspective that comes out of this, we can articulate, I think we can articulate pretty clearly. And I think that in some senses, the details matter, but it's that broader vision that I think it would be important for the city to sign on to or change. And then, like, you know, because there are other things that could be done that we haven't thought about, and like you said, other ideas that are out there. But it's like, what is the philosophy we have about community safety? And what I see coming out of this is, like you said, yes, the police have a role, but then there are all these other realms where there are other kinds of responses, alternatives that could be tried.
It just happens to
work better, and that's what I see people saying. What's that?
Oh, it's just like sometimes things are illegal. That wasn't your fault.
Right, exactly. We create crime by making things illegal. So one thing,
chase some family needs pretty soon, but I did want to thank everybody. It was I'll tell you, there's a lot of times, you know, where you have to talk about data stuff, and it's a pleasure to have that conversation with a savvy group like y'all.
well, yeah, thank both you and Aisha. It was really great to see this preliminary analysis. We look forward to the fuller analysis. In terms of the timing, we should get this from Sam. When is the budget meeting in June?
Well, I think so. The next PCCEP timeline is next week, right? The 25th. Yeah. And then there are 2 funding processes that I would say are the next kind of funding opportunities at the city. One is the installment of the American Rescue Plan funding. So that was authorized by President Biden and Congress in early March, mid-March. And that allocated funding directly to local governments. So the city of Portland is set to receive about $218 million for that. And the first installment comes at the end of this month. The second installment comes in the fall. So that is the next, that's going to be the next funding opportunity at the city of Portland. And these recommendations, if PCCEP chooses to, once you all vote, deliberate on this, right? It could then go and form pre-proposals submitted by bureaus for that funding. The other funding opportunity, folks here I think are familiar with it, is the fall bump, the budget monitoring process, and that is technical adjustment for the process. So those, I would say, are the next funding opportunities that PCCEP, these recommendations can inform.
But when is the June approval of the budget happen?
So last Thursday, City Council voted on next fiscal year's budget. And let me see.
9th, isn't it the next where something can be public comment before city council?
I'm looking it up.
So if it's sometime in early June, let's say it's the 9th, I would say even if we can't directly intervene in that discussion, it probably makes sense for this to be presented before then. So sometime in that first week or before the 9th, if the 9th is the date. Is that the date, Sam?
Yeah. Let me get for sure the date and time, and I will email that to the co-chairs. And please share it with PCCEP members. And then what I can commit to is compare the budget with PCCEP's recommendations. So that way PCCEP can see and the public can see, for example, right, you have a recommendation on PS3s. How does that translate, or how does that relate to the upcoming fiscal year city budget? There's one for Portland Street Response. So I'll get you the numbers on the next fiscal year as they pertain to each recommendation. So
okay. Yeah, that's great. So we'll figure out, Sam, a time that we could hopefully go before city council before then. And let Adam and Aisha know that date, because what we want is their report to be ready by then. And I know that it's a really tight deadline for them. So, as soon as we could find out what that date is, the better for all of us.
Hey, Sam, real quick before we go, I have a question for you. Is it possible to get a breakdown of what, like somebody and I have always said, the cost analysis of adding or subtracting our recommendations? Can you do like a broad cost analysis of, if we implement this recommendation, what would be the burden to the public or to the community? Because we never talk about financing, and that's like my major thing, is like, what's the cost to put this into play? And if we can find something that's what I call cost neutral, or not gonna, like cost a bunch of money to implement, it's easier to move those items up first, is what I've learned. So can you do a cost analysis of just all recommendations that we have, that we need to vote on, so we can see which ones are going to be maybe a little harder to move forward because they have a higher cost burden?
Yeah, let me touch base. We have been working pretty closely with the city budget office. So let me see what I can get done. But I definitely appreciate you naming that. And Chair Young has asked to make sure that we can get like whether it's FTE or what, an estimate, kind of budget range
Right,
for that.
right.
So, and I also appreciate PCCEP for believing your draft recommendations. You also included some potential funding sources. So I remember folks had pointed to federal funding opportunities for things like the Portland Street response. So those are also really helpful. So I will
Okay,
work on
thank
that.
you.
Amy.
Thank you.
Okay, well, so the next step will be our PCCEP full board meeting, and hopefully we'll have a robust discussion. I don't know, Adam and Aisha, are you able to attend that meeting, the 25th?
Yeah, I think we're breaking our own rules on some vacation time that we're taking and crashing in with you.
Okay, well, sorry to ruin your vacation.
That's the 25th. I thought not the 26th.
25th, Tuesday.
Theo, can you send me send both of us an invite like you did last time?
Yep, I'll send that right now.
And it's a 3-hour long meeting, but we'll give you a more precise time so you could just come for the hour, that we discuss this, so you can have more of a vacation.
Yeah, it's cool.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us tonight, and especially thank Adam and Aisha for their amazing work and great presentation. And I look forward to bringing this up with PCCEP and the community. So Theo, could you put, or Sam, how could we get these results? Is we didn't just make a PDF of the results and then send them to Theo and he could put them up, the quantitative data?
Are you talking about the presentation that Adam and Aisha did?
No, I think just the Google form results.
Yeah, let me work with Theo on that, but I think.
Oh, I can post what I have in this chat right now. Just give me a second to find it.
Because I think for Adam and Aisha's analysis, we should wait for the final one, them to continue to do that, and we could present that later. But just the raw, it's not raw data, but whatever the data that people filled out that you get on the Google Forms could be put out so people could see what the responses were.
Yeah, and Elliot, that line item report that Aisha just got done with is phenomenal, easy to read. It's really easy to follow.
Yeah.
Adam, why don't you just email me? Oh, okay, you got it right there.
Yeah, shoot, man, I'm sorry, I meant to send it to everybody. Let me do that one more time. It's this is not our data. This is the Google Forms data. Hey.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. So once we get that up, we could let people know that it's there, so people could start seeing what we're seeing as well. All right, thanks everyone. Sorry to keep you a few minutes over.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Thanks all.